Thank you. Hi, I'm Charles Robert Darwin. He just called me packing to go on my famous trip to the Galapagos Islands. Due to a time anomaly, I'm able to live my life all over again. My ship, the HMS Beagle, doesn't leave for a few hours, so I have plenty of time to tell you all about my life, in which I was a husband, a father, a prolific author. I wrote 15 books, a naturalist, a geologist, entomologist, naturalist, and a correspondent, researcher, and also was a failed doctor and a failed clergyman. And I was a controversial figure. I did all those things. So I'd like to tell you today about my life. I was born February 12, 1809, into a wealthy family in Shrewsbury, England. I was fifth youngest of 6 children, and we lived here in the Mount House. My grandfather was Erasmus Darwin, was a noted abolitionist, botanist, freethinker, physician. My dad, Robert, was a prosperous physician, and my mom, Susanna Wedgwood, heiress to the Wedgwood Pottery Company. My mom died when I was 8, and I was raised by my 2 older sisters. However, at age 9, I went to Shrewsbury boarding school a mile from my house, and there I was an average student. Went there with my older brother Erasmus. Average student, trained in the classical studies, and mediocre at best. But I was very interested in the natural sciences and hunting with my dogs. And my dad would tell me, you do nothing but hunt with your dogs and chase rats. You'll be nothing in your life at all. Well, luckily my dad put an addition on the house and made it into a laboratory, and I was able to help him with his experiments. At age 16 in 1825, I went to Edinburgh College, or Edinburgh University in Scotland, to be trained as a physician, just like my dad. However, at this school, the medical courses bored me, dissecting cadavers horrified me, and giving medical exams disgusted me, so I changed majors in schools, and in 1828 went to Christ College in Cambridge to become an Anglican minister. This didn't work out, but I did take a course in botany by world famous botanist John Henslow, and he got me super interested in plants and insects, so much so that I ended up having a vast beetle collection in college. No, not these kind of beetles, but these here. There are 350,000 kinds of beetles. I ended up graduating from college in 1831, 10th in my class, and with a bachelor's degree. Then in December of that same year, Henslow recommended me for a position on the Beagle, which was a survey ship to go around South America and then circumnavigate the world. You see, trade relations had opened up, and we needed information on the harbors, bays, and inlets of South America, plus the Patagonia section, which is very treacherous, or the Cape Horn area, the southern section of it. And as well as the 26-year-old captain, Robert Fitzroy, was in desperate need of intellectual companionship. Now, the Admiralty recommended this for me for this position, and my dad balked at it, but my uncle persuaded him otherwise. And I was to pay my own way and go as a gentleman naturalist, which means I would collect, preserve, and record specimens, take copious notes, bring them all back to England with me after the trip, and study on my own. This sounded like a win-win situation to me. So in order to prepare for the trip, I took all my belongings, my books on geology and botany, as well as weapons to protect myself, and we went on the HMS Beagle in December of 31. My room was right here, but really a better picture of this is right here. My room was 6 foot by 9, and we left in December 31 from Plymouth Bay, England, and headed south. First stop, Cape Verde Islands, where I investigated shores out there, the beaches. And then on to South America. We would spend 3 years going around South America, as well as, in total for the whole trip, 500 days at sea, which is a year and a half, and 1,200 days on land. The land part was the best because I get seasick for days at a time. In South America, we stopped at the Amazon rainforest where I collected specimens. And then on to Rio de Janeiro, where I experienced the slave trade. Then on to Montevideo, Uruguay, the Falkland Islands, and in Argentina, I collected fossils of ancient animals that lived in the Pleistocene era tens of thousands of years ago, like giant sloths that were 6 feet tall, as well as huge elephants. And then on to Chile, where Fitzroy named a mountain after me, and I experienced an earthquake. And then on to Peru, where we hiked up mountains and found seashells at the top of mountains, which means land had risen from the bottom of the ocean all the way to the top of mountains by the very experience that I had, which is earthquakes. And again, this is the Beagle that we traveled on, going out there. And then we went out to the Galapagos Islands, which are 600 miles west of Ecuador. And originally I was going to go there to study the volcanic islands out there. But there are many forested areas, and I became enamored with the plants and animals on those forested areas. And honestly, I felt like a kid going to the Galapagos Islands, because it's a naturalist's dream come true. Why? It was warm, isolated, and the only animals that could get on the island were to swim or to fly there. And I would spend, from September 35, I would spend 5 weeks there, dedicate 1/4 of all my notes there, and went to these islands in particular: San Cristobal, Florina, Isabella, and Santiago. And these are the kind of animals that I saw there with me taking notes: giant tortoises, marine iguanas, cactus, mockingbirds, finches, and of course insects. And then I kept, on the first island I would collect mockingbirds and finches, but by the time I got to the second island, Florina, I noticed that the finches I collected, there was a variation in the beaks that they had of the different species. The beaks here were the giveaway. That is, these beaks were specially made adaptations for these finches to survive and then reproduce and then pass on their genes to the next generation. This kind of adaptation to the land is called natural selection. Of course, we'd collect them in nets like this, and they had different kinds of beaks for the species depending on where they live on the islands. Some ate seeds, some ate nuts, some ate buds and fruit, some had grubs, some had insects, some had leaves. Each place had a different kind of species of it. Actually, there are 26 kinds of birds on the Galapagos Islands. 15 of them are Galapagos finches or Darwin finches. Again, about 7 of them mainly eat insects. A couple of them mainly eat seeds. Some eat cactus and plants. Some had buds and fruits. These were fast evolving birds because these islands are just volcanic slabs of rock, and after a few thousand years had forests on them. And by the time I got to the third island, I noticed that there were markings on turtles, and I could tell which island that they came from. And the third island also found marine iguanas that would eat algae. And by the fourth island, Santiago, at this point my crewmates would help me collect specimens while I take notes all along. So my theory of natural selection is that individuals differ, and some of these differences can be passed on to help them survive, which is called survival of the fittest. They are fittest for the area that they live in. And this fitness comes from adaptations that increases their chances of survival. And only the fittest organisms pass their traits on, which can alter the species after a while. And actually, I was used to dealing with strange animals because I belonged to the University of Cambridge Glutton Club, where we meet once a week and eat strange animals like owls, hawks, and even rodents. When I came back to England in 1836, I had amassed 5,400 specimens. I had dozens of carcasses preserved in salt, skins, pelts, nests, eggs, feathers, rocks, and had amassed 770 pages of notes. I had a whole lifetime worth of research ahead of me. Luckily, I had the time and money to do this. My dad gave me a 400-pound allowance a year. But let's take some background into this. It was thought that God made the world in 6 days about 6,500 years ago. And God created man and woman, or Adam and Eve, and put them in a Garden of Eden-like place. And in all illustrations of this, Adam and Eve are always white and always have perfectly coiffed hair. So, and everything was formed just like this. Everything. The animals, the plants, the birds, the trees, topological features, even the air we breathe, it was all put in place as if by magic and was unmutable. It didn't change at all. Luckily, though, it didn't change, and this was hammered home by the Bible for 1,800 years, by priests, and it was by folklore. This was the mindset at the time. Luckily, though, I lived in the Enlightenment period, and some people had some visionary ideas, like Jean Lamarck, a French naturalist, who said that animals have acquired traits or improvements, that is, traits that they pick up from their environment that helps them survive and then reproduce and pass on their genes to the next generation. Much like a giraffe that once had a short neck, but kept stretching for leaves. This stretchiness then was passed on till now they have 6-foot-long necks. And any feature not utilized was not passed down at all, much like a use and disuse theory. Well, didn't explain genetic variation, it was a good idea. Thomas Malthus came along and said that human population grows, but the population would outstrip food supply, because human population grows at a geometric rate, 1, 2, 4, 16, 32, 64, and food production increases arithmetically, 1, 2, 3, 4. We didn't have 1 billion people on the planet back in my day, but now you have 8 billion and you're able to feed the world through GMOs and fantastic animal husbandry. But he predicted famine and disease. Actually, this happened 2 years ago when Ukraine, the world's largest breadbasket, had its grain blockaded. So 350 million people in underdeveloped countries went into starvation mode. He's proved correct. And Alfred Wallace, he was a protege of mine. I was his mentor. He had gone around the world just like me, and he proposed endemism, which means that plants and animals are endemic to certain biological niches or biomes. And that, like, for instance, we only see this tree frog in rainforests, but not in the Arctic, that's why. And we only see this kind of bird in Australia, but not in Tibet or Canada. But my theory of natural selection is individuals whose physical and behavioral characteristics are best adapted to their habitat or environment have better chances of reproducing and passing on their DNA to future generations. I found this through looking at the beaks on the finches in the Galapagos. And also, I found this out by working with pigeon breeders who wanted pigeons with bigger wingspans or more iridescent feathers on their neck, that they would breed male and female similarly alike. We do the same thing with dogs. We breed them. Now there are 200 different species of dogs, and we do the same thing with sheep. You find a male and female has a lot of wool on them, and that's how you bait them, and that's how you get animals with a lot of wool to make money. This is called artificial selection. That is, we do it. But nature does it on its own and weeds out the ones that can't survive and keeps on the ones that do, how they adapt to their environment. This is called natural selection, or simply put, nature finds a way. And of course, we had jokes in my days. Why did the chicken cross the road? Well, chickens over a great period of time have been naturally selected in such a way they are now genetically dispositioned to cross roads. That was supposed to be funny in our time. Apparently not. Okay, when I was 30 in 1839, I fell in love with my cousin, Emma Wedgwood. We had a short courtship, short engagement, and before we got married, I was a list maker and a scientist, and I wanted to write down the pros and cons of being married. And I thought that, well, being married would outweigh having a dog. And we had a quick, simple Anglican ceremony, as I was agnostic and Unitarian, and she was more spiritual than me. But we'd have a long, loving marriage lasting 43 years. And in that time, we produced 10 children. And the firstborn was William Erasmus, actually documented his hiccuping, coughing, and sneezing in my science journals and had them published. But that's what your firstborn is for, a science experiment, which I'll allow. And my second one was Anne Elizabeth. She was born in 1841, and we were really close when she was growing up, but she died in 1851 of tuberculosis. After that, I stopped going to church and gave up religion. Third, Francis, he was a botanist. Fourth, George Howard was a distinguished geophysicist, an expert on tides, and knighted by the Queen. Elizabeth stayed with us all her life and didn't marry. Henrietta helped me out with my notes later on in life and became her mother's biographer. Horace became president of founded the Cambridge Instrument Company, knighted by the Queen, and Leonard was a member of Parliament. So these are my kids, and I had a great time with them. They were the joy of my life. Here we are together like this. And I would do all kinds of things with them. If you want to remember me, and don't remember my theories, remember me for this, because I was very close to my kids as I would play the games that they like. I played backgammon with them, play cards with them, read with them, do all the fun things with them. And I watched them grow up to be fine adults. And I was first to question whether incest had anything to do with 3 of my kids being infertile and 3 of them dying early. Well, I noticed this by checking out the inbred plants in my garden. So sarcastically speaking, I discovered the vitality of genetic variation in species, but had 10 kids with my first cousin. So go figure, it's because love is blind. And we all lived together in a house south of London, 15 miles south in the Kent countryside, called Down House. You could take tours of it today, which it looks like this, my estate, and very briefly, my parlor, Emma and I ate, my bedroom, and my desk in my den, which would be a pivotal point of what I would do. Actually, I lived my life as a country gentleman. I would take long walks, spend time with my kids, and then go in my den and then write there for hours every day. So the desk was prominent in what I did. And I would be a prolific writer. I would write lists and then write my essays and books at my desk. But before I would publish, I would send my works to geologists or botanists, anybody who's specifically in the field, and they make suggestions, and then I publish. And they do the same things with me. They would send me their manuscripts, and I'd make suggestions. That's how a scientist collaborated back in the day. And I even drew things like my tree of life, that most animals come from a common ancestor or a few common ancestors and then branch off, and then we'll get into this in a little bit. And all this time I had this mysterious illness. After I came back from South America, I had periods of vomiting, headaches, queasiness, stomach problems. I tried 20 different doctors, but to no avail. I even tied batteries around my stomach, see if that would work. But then I figured out that I was lactose intolerant, so I figured if I gave up that would be helpful to milk products. And I'd write books, like The Voyage of the Beagle, like my diary. Well, here's the Beagle without any masts on. And I write about coral reefs, there's my book, geological observations of South America, geology of South America, and about barnacles. I became an expert on barnacles. And you say, so what? Who cares about barnacles? Well, they attach themselves onto whales, and they get at the bottom of the ships and slow them down. The admiralty was always interested in that. And all this time, I had gone around, and I'd be studying what I would do. I'd be studying my insects and plants that I had, and stuffed animals there that I had. And I would like to make a book on insectivore plants doing this, and I actually went to my specimens and my notes so often that I invented the wheeled office chair. I put wheels on my chair to scoot around, and that's how you guys did that in your days when you guys worked. And all this time I've been working for 20 years on my magnum opus on the origin of species by means of natural selection. And I kept going back to my notes and my specimens, trying to be sure I had solid, empirical, rational, cogent truth that I was going to write about. That specifically it was to be well done. And I didn't publish because my colleagues would think it was a myth, that what I was working on was a bit heretical, and I would be dismissed by my colleagues. So I didn't publish. I kicked the can down the road for all this time because I kept checking my notes and was afraid to publish. Until 1858, I got a letter and an essay from Alfred Wallace. And he had written about the same thing I did, about natural selection. So I wrote to him and I said, okay, you and I have the same idea, so let's both jointly give our papers at the Linnaean Society, England's top science society. My colleague said, you go do that with Wallace, but it's about time you publish your work, Darwin. Pull the trigger. And I did. Origin of Species was made in 1859, and of course it became a bestseller. 1,200 copies just flew off the shelves at first. There's been 7 editions of it, and they look like this. And it wasn't until the 5th edition that I said the word survival of the fittest. It wasn't until the 6th edition that I said evolution. And wouldn't you know, you remember my Captain Fitzroy? We've been good friends for 25 years, and when this book came out, he went on a public tirade against me because he believed in the creationist side or the biblical side of what happened. So I lost him as a friend. He had married an evangelical woman and got seduced by that side. But some major takeaways by my book, Origin of Species, are that number 1, that species originate from a few common ancestors or a common ancestor, and that number 2, that species take a long time to develop over time, like tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions of years. And they don't change because of some cataclysmic, catastrophic, ultra-dynamic problems like floods, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, or fires. And that, number 3, that the principles in geology that happened way in the past are still going on now. Things like sedimentation or erosion or volcanic eruptions going on now. And in 1870 run, I wrote Descent of Man in relation to sex. And in it, I proposed that humans are really primates and that we all evolved indirectly from a common ancestor back in the day. And it's the female of the species that controls who she chooses for a mate. Am I going for a mate? And she's the one directly in charge. Let me explain. About 15 million years ago, we believe we had a common ancestor, the primates did, and they eventually branched off to be orangutans, branched off to be gorillas, branched off to be monkeys, apes, and chimps, and we branched off as hominins, or human-like figures, about 5 million years ago. And what makes us human are 3 distinct things. Number 1, that we walk bipedally or upright. No other animal does that. Number 2, our brain is 3 pounds or 2% our body weight. No other animal has as highest encephalization quotient than us. And number 3, our humerus, the bone that runs between the elbow to the shoulder, is 30% shorter than the femur, the bone that runs between the knee to the hip. Those are the 3 qualities that make us human. And if you're ever stuck at the airport and don't have your ID at the TSA line, just say those 3 qualities and they'll get you right through. Okay, now about sexual selection. Well, there are traits that are detrimental to survival, but provide an advantage in mating. Well, everybody knows what the frog is, but the loudest one gets the female. These peacocks have silly, ostentatious feathers, but the most brilliant display gets the female. The female vole, when it wants to mate, actually chases the male to see if it's fit enough. And the cardinal, right here, this cardinal, you can see 100 yards away, but he's advertising with this color. He's saying, look at me, baby. I'm fit, I'm robust, I'm healthy. You mate with me and your offspring will be the same and the species will continue further. Same thing with the male lion. It's got this mane on it and it's an advertisement and he's saying to the female, hey babe, you got me on this one. If we mate, you'll be pregnant the next day. I'm virile and full of testosterone. Of course, the female looks at him and says, well, maybe, baby. But all talk and no action, so get over here and let's see what happens. So my ideas, though, were ridiculed, put down, turned upside down, castigated, and it was thought that we were a monkey's uncle. That is, we were direct descendants of apes, and that we should be exalted, though. This is a moral outrage to be anything associated with these animals. This should not be taught to kids, to adults, to nobody. This is a moral outrage because look how intelligent we are. Well, we can read, we can write, we can invent things, we can make fantastic cities, and we are on the evolutionary ladder going up. But these primates, they're disgusting, they're filthy, they have mentality of 2-year-olds. They're disgusting, and they can't communicate, even though Jane Goodall says that they can, through sign language. But anyway, we don't want to be associated with these at all. This is just too low for us to deal with. Actually, it's not the strongest nor the most intelligent of the species that survives, but the one most adaptable to change. Heard you have nuclear weapons and can use them anytime in Ukraine or Israel. But you know you'd survive that? That's right, the lowly cockroach. It's been around for 320 million years and impossible to catch. And then there's one person who would survive, and she lives here in the villages. She's the foremost real estate person here in the village. Her name is Thelma Sells a Lot. And Thelma sells actually timeshares to naive snowbirds right inside the iconic water tower at Sumter Landing, right inside there. She offers a great location with waterfront property. And she also sells Avon, dog houses to dogs, and misbehaved husbands. And you can reach her anytime at 1-800-CHA-CHING. Okay, so my ideas were a direct contradiction to the Bible. It was heresy. What had been around for almost 2,000 years, I destroyed in a book. Therefore, it was controversial. And there's other people like me too. But I didn't know her. Mary Anning lived at the same time in England that I did. But she's responsible for the phrase, she sells seashells by the seashore. And she would collect fossils because she would find them embedded in these cliffs here in England by the seashore. And she found these ichthyosaurs, giant reptile-like dinosaurs that roamed the seas millions of years ago. How did she know how old they were? Simple. The further they down in the rock strata these fossils are, the older they are. Any kid knows this. So she showed them to pastors and their family. They wouldn't believe her. You know why they wouldn't believe her? Because the heart is stronger than the mind That's why. Emotions reign supreme. And this is in every single biology book in the world. It's the case of the peppered moth. Used to be, England had a lot of light-colored trees, and there were moths on them. Light-colored and dark-colored moths. And the birds, though, on these light-colored trees would pick off the dark-colored ones because they're easy to see. But during the Industrial Revolution, we had a lot of coal burning at that time, and it changed the atmosphere a bit to make it more sooty. So therefore the trees had soot on them and made them darker. So the birds then found the dark-colored ones hard to get, but the light-colored ones were easy because they weren't camouflaged. So they became rare. Thus, things have to change, and sometimes suddenly. If you don't adapt, you don't live. And speaking of insects, all this time I really had Chagas disease, which is really the kissing bug disease. And this is why I had heart problems, cardiorhythmy, as well as my stomach problems. And actually I died in April of 1882 at age 73 from a heart attack. I was in down house, my family was surrounded by me, and my last words were, "I'm not the least afraid to die." I was buried in Westminster Abbey, not too far from Isaac Newton and astronomer John Herschel, and thousands came to my funeral. I was a national hero. Now you're probably thinking, well, this is the end of it. He must not have anything else to talk about. Actually, I do, because the controversy still rings on today and to this minute. Let's find out how. My theory of evolution is just a theory. And however, over the last 160 years, people have tried to take my theory down. Actually, I don't mind that at all, because science is about finding better answers. You got something better? I say, if you're going to take me on, then bring it. Let's see what you got. Because it's so easy to use a sledgehammer and knock down my theories. What have you got instead? Mainly it's pseudoscience, psychobabble, and a lot of emotional strings attached onto any theory at all. To put it in your words, yo bro, you ain't got squat. So if you're going to take me on and have a pissing contest with me, then drink a lot of fluid. And if you're not in the natural sciences to today's world, like geology, botany, entomology, zoology, and you don't have my theories, you're not going anywhere. You'd be not a hero, a big zero. No one, you'd be discounted. Yeah. You'd be considered a pseudoscientist, a flake, a humbug, a phony. Just like some of these clubs out here that run conspiracy theory ideas, like aliens and UFOs. No, not at all. Yeah, fantastic claims require fantastic proof. So you need to bring it. And my opinion is either you got evidence, either put up or shut up. So, actually we're just an advanced breed of monkeys living on a minor planet of an average star, but we can understand the universe. We live on a small planet, average-sized planet, in an average-sized solar system, in an average-sized arm of an average-sized galaxy. There are 2 trillion galaxies just like us, each with hundreds of billions of stars in them that can have life and can have solar systems around them. And that there have been 22 species of hominins, or human-like creatures, over time, going way back to Ardipithecus ramidus, from 4 million years ago, Australopithecus afarensis, or Lucy, about 3.5 million years ago, Homo habilis, 2 million years ago, Homo erectus, that just died out 70,000 years ago, Neanderthal, that left us about 30,000 years ago, and Homo sapien, that's us. We've been around for 300,000 years. And we're the only ones left to survive. So my ideas cascaded like a flowing river and rumbled and tumbled into, excuse me a second. Thank you. And rumbled and tumbled into, let's see if I can get by here. Sermons, thank you. Sermons. And sermons in churches. It rumbled into conversations you'd have with your spouse at the dinner table. It rumbled into periodicals, magazines, newspapers, public discourses, everywhere, even talk on the street. And this all came to fruition 99 years ago in the Scopes trial. Thank you. John Scopes, a high school biology teacher, taught evolution in a Tennessee state-funded school, which wasn't legal at the time. And there was a civil lawsuit involved, and on his side, he had Clarence Darrow, which represented the evolution side of it, or the science side of it, the rational thinking. On the other side was William Jennings Bryan. He represented the creationist viewpoint, or the biblical point of view. William Jennings Bryan was the most gifted orator of his time, ran for president 3 times, and was greatly respected. And they both went at it, and it became a book, movie, and a play called Inherit the Wind. And in this, Darrow would cross-examine Bryan and say, okay, Mr. Bryan, you don't subscribe to this evolution idea, so how was the earth made? And Bryan had a ready-made answer right there. He said, oh, the earth was made 6,427 years ago on a Tuesday in June at 9 a.m. And the courtroom audience burst into laughter. Someone even saying, was that Eastern Standard Time or Central Time? And Darrow went on to expose the hypocrisies of what he had to say, because there's no empirical proof, no substantial evidence whatsoever. This went on for a while, and actually Scopes lost the trial, had to pay $100. Bryan would later die from public humiliation 3 weeks later. Let's just jump this up today. By chance or design, survey 12 years ago, that God created humans in their present form, 46%. That God guided the evolution of humans, 32%, and had no problem, no existence, is 14%. So this is evolution versus creationism, or intelligent design, excuse me. And as evolution and how creatures may have developed and came out of the swamps and out of the oceans to become the creatures we know, or creationism, how things just developed by the snap of your fingers. Why not just take this local? Well, we have Carl Baugh coming here to Leesburg, Florida, about 4 years ago. He runs the Creationist Evidence Museum in Texas. And he's able to explain, he's been looking for Noah's Ark, and he's able to explain how dinosaurs and other creatures could all fit inside this ark. And Mr. Tom DeRosa came out here and talked about exposing the myths of evolution. So this is creation versus Darwinism. And Mr. DeRosa had this article put in the paper, and this advertisement about indoctrinating children to the fact of evolution when it's just a theory. And your newspaper, why the Daily Sun, has had 15 different articles about faith in action in the last 8 months. During that time, they've had 7 pictures of really the same thing, people with their hands exalted up in the air. Well, now we got the idea about this. How about showing science in action? Show the other side of the coin and have fair, balanced reporting. Why not just, let me go back a second. So, right now, there's a 15-year-old boy or girl being indoctrinated into a Christian household and going to a Christian school. And one day, they'll come out to the villages and they'll give a talk like Mr. DeRosa did out here. But why wait for that? Why not just go to the Art Museum in Petersburg, Kentucky, a creation museum, and see a full-scale replica of Noah's Ark? Why? It's $27 million, 70,000 square feet. It costs $80 a person to get in, and it's costs $27 million to build. And inside of it, you will see 600-year-old Noah, Adam and Eve that are, of course, white and look like they popped out of an 80s disco. And you can see, go in there and take your family and see this. And it looks like this, even handicapped accessible. So this is evidence for creation. This is evidence for evolution. And the two sides just keep going at it. Why not just go to Pensacola 20 years ago and see Dinosaur Adventureland? After all, dinosaurs and men must have lived together because the Earth is only 6,500 years old. But actually this shut down because the owner was told by God not to pay federal taxes for his employees. Went to prison for 12 years. And so humans developed from earlier species, disagreed, 35% agree that humans and dinosaurs lived at the same time, even though they're separated by 65 million years ago, and there are millions of dinosaur fossils to prove this. Well, don't know, 29%, agree, 30%, disagree, 41%. And that evolution is a scientific theory based on observable evidence like fossils. It's taught by scientists. We talked about the finches evolving and man evolving. What about horses? Sure, 30 million years ago, Eohippus, and eventually became this. But creationism is labeled now as pseudoscience, just based on imagination of some nomadic people. It's taught by preachers. Let's jump to more current times. Christina Camarero ran for Secretary of State in the state of Michigan 2 years ago, was a conspiracy theorist, and believed that evolution should not be taught in public schools. She then became the GOP party chairwoman for the entire state of Michigan. Candace Taylor became the GOP party chairwoman for the entire state of Georgia, even though she's a flat earther and says the globes are part of a conspiracy. So what you have now are alternate facts. Your country is in a cold civil war because opinions count just as much as facts. Facts are discounted because we don't want to upset and hurt someone's feelings. So now you have alternate facts, but in my day, a rectangle had 4 sides. In your day, you could have 3 sides, 2 sides, any sides. And changing the subject a bit, we now have wonderful vaccines that could save people's lives. They're often discounted, these vaccines, by quite a number of groups, which aren't true. Things like saying that vaccines cause autism or death, and they don't, or that they cause ADHD, or that they have microchips in them. This is nutball thinking by conspiracy groups. But in my day, we didn't have those vaccines, and my neighbor, Ken Johnson, lost his kid to diphtheria. There was a measles outbreak in 1850s in London. We lost dozens of kids. My kid, Anne Elizabeth, died because of something that you can get a shot for nowadays. I want her back, but you guys discount it, or at least your clubs do out here, and they discount it. That's not cool to do. So we have shots that can be able to solve this problem, and yet they're discounted. Life is very precious. Even your president of my time, Abraham Lincoln, had a child that died from typhoid fever. Now they have shots for that. Moving on. So this is creation versus evolution, or the heart and mind. That is, the heart, the emotional part of us, sometimes outweighs the mind part of us. That's called the dichotomy, or in psychology is called cognitive dissonance. Because of all the information built up that says something, people believe just the opposite. 22 years ago in Georgia, they put a sticker on high school biology books saying this textbook contains material on evolution, is really just a theory, not a fact, and they discounted the whole idea. Well, many of you read fantastic books here and tell other people about the books you read. And for whatever subject you're studying, how about if I place a sticker on your book about the subject and discount it like that? Well, if I stuck that sticker on a book, you tell me exactly where to put it. So is biology God's living creation, or is it just things that just happen? So I can go on forever like this, and enough. So there are many things named after me, like Darwin University in Australia, beautiful campus. There's City of Darwin, Fort Darwin Football Club, International Airport, Darwin Day in Iowa City. There are 250 insects and flies named after me. And you can go to Galapagos Island and see my research station. You can go see a statue of me and Mount Darwin, which is in Chile. There are stamps named after me with my likeness on them, and even commemorative coins and real money. And then there's the Darwin Awards. People doing really stupid things and end up losing their life because of it. So who gets the winner this year? Just pick. So, are we walking off a cliff? How come you guys, let me ask you a question, how come you guys went this way? Did you go forward, backwards, or sideways? Which way did you guys go? And you can follow Mike Hughes, who wanted to prove the earth was flat, and put a rocket up in the air. Of course, it blew up. He died. Maybe Candace Taylor should have gone with him. And social Darwinism is, in my day, there was Carnegie and Rockefeller, and they were the fittest because they had the most money. In your days, it's Musk, Zuckerberg, and Bezos, and about 1,000 individuals who control 95% of the wealth of this country. So who's fittest? And on a more positive note, there's a group taking a trip around the world like I did, visiting 32 ports of call. And this was the schooner that I was on, the HMS Beagle, and a trip of a lifetime. And lastly, why? I was a geology major, so of course I had a rock band called the Rolling Pebbles. And this is me playing bass guitar. And baby, we really cranked the hits out because it's evolution, baby. And the Rolling Pebbles put out, "If You Start Me Up." I said, I like it. Get off my cloud. I was shattered. Sometimes I'd jump around like Jack Flash. I had sympathy for the devil. And just like tumbling dice, you got to roll me. And I'll never, ever be your beast of burden. Give me shelter, paint it black, and of course I can't get no satisfaction. And you can't always get what you want. But if you try sometimes, you just might find you get what you need with the chorus saying la 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 in the background. And so this is me, Charles Darwin, and I believed I stimulated people to think, and thank you very much.